The word disaster originates from the Greek word astron, which means bad or unlucky star. This dates back to when astrology was considered a serious science that could predict life-changing events. This was much before it was used for creating what we know today as the female personality. Natural disasters are powerful and often unpredictable events that arise from Earth's natural processes. The movement of tectonic plates releasing energy in the form of earthquakes, meteorological phenomena such as hurricanes and tornadoes, and other events that don't come with a pleasant greeting. And even though we've made tremendous advancements as a species in the field of science and technology, the power of Mother Nature is something humans can't always control. But not all disasters are those that occur naturally. Some of the most devastating disasters to happen come from human activities and decisions that lead to devastating consequences. This could range from industrial accidents such as explosions, the collapsing of a mine shaft, or chemical spills, all the way to bouncy castles being thrown up into the sky with people inside, being carried for miles. They could also be as bad as Call of Duty lobbies filled with middle-aged men saying your mom jokes to each other. And that's what we'll be taking a look at in this video, a dive into some of the worst and some of the weirdest accidents and unnatural disasters in human history. Russia seems to be a household name when it comes to catastrophic failures. I suppose that can only make sense when the average Russian drinks about 180 bottles of vodka per year. Not only that, but the people in charge up there love invading countries and maintaining power over every group and party they possibly can. And what better way to do that than with nuclear power? Back in the days of World War II, the Soviet Union wasn't quite at the point they wanted to be with research and development of nuclear weapons. So in 1945, they fast-tracked the development of the Mayak nuclear plant in order to keep up with the US in the arms race. As we all know, nuclear weapons are spooky. World-ending spooky. Which equals not safe, which means the main issue with building a facility to design deadly weaponry is that safety is nowhere near the top priority. So needless to say, after construction was finished and research was getting underway, there was an important question that needed answering. What do we do with all this nuclear waste? The answer? Oh, just dump it in all the waterways. Let nature deal with this. And that's what they did. This solution worked until the 1950s, but by this point, the lake they used as their dump became the most polluted spot on the planet. That's not very good for public relations, so obviously they came up with a workaround. The Russians built a storage facility 30 feet underground that consisted of 20 steel tanks, each with the ability to contain 70 to 80 tons of waste. I think we can all agree that that sounds better than the previous solution they had. Until you account for the radioactive waste that's constantly heating up in the stainless steel containers, and the cooling systems that were the equivalent of a desk fan. When you put the pieces together, it just becomes a recipe for disaster. So on September 29th, 1957, tragedy struck. One of these stainless steel tanks exploded due to a failed cooling system. The explosion was estimated to have a force of at least 70 tons of TNT, which isn't a lot compared to something like Hiroshima, but it is a lot compared to 0 tons of TNT. Regardless, the impact of this explosion was exceptional. It created a large plume of radioactive smoke that contaminated an area upwards of 20,000 square kilometers. Over 270,000 people were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Over 10,000 residents of the surrounding towns were evacuated. But of course not until a week after the explosion happened. You know how it goes in the motherland. What you don't know won't hurt you. To this day, the true amount of casualties is unknown, but is currently estimated at anywhere between 200 and 6,000 people. We'll take a step back for a moment to unwind from that dreary topic and look at something more exciting, where people died in a what the fuck kind of way instead of a what the fuck kind of way. We'll take a trip to Ireland, known for producing some of the best fighters in the world, whether it be against other fighters or public transit. It's also known for its production of whiskey. On June 18, 1875, a man named Lawrence Malone had a storehouse filled with over 250 imperial gallons of whiskey. As we all know by now, good things never last. Between 4:30 and 8:30 p.m. that night, a fire with unknown origins began blazing within the warehouse, and by 9:30, the barrels began exploding due to the heat, causing a river of flaming whiskey to be unleashed through the streets as if Poseidon himself came to the surface. It took way too long for nearby people to understand what was actually going on. Their lives certainly would have been washed away if it weren't for the heroic, conflagrated pigs that were screaming for their lives. Thanks to the delicious-smelling livestock, the nearby townspeople were able to evacuate straight to the smell of barbecue. This intense fire was put out within the day, and no lives were actually lost. Well, not to smoke inhalation or the flames anyway. I'm sure if you were an Irishman from the 1800s and a stream of whiskey was flowing past your doorstep, you'd be cashing out too. The townsfolk took any container they could find to hold as much whiskey as they could. This resulted in 24 hospitalizations and 13 fatalities strictly due to alcohol poisoning. Not to mention the alcohol was just collecting all of the Irish road gunk as it flowed into the streets. Nothing wrong with a few notes of glass and hints of animal feces in your drink. Something like that would probably go for around $22 in a restaurant these days. Up next, we'll take a look at the world of transportation. Humanity has come a long way from horse and buggy, but has it gotten any safer? Aviation transportation is considered one of the safest forms of travel, but the few times it goes poorly, the outcome is usually devastating. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 was scheduled to travel from Tokyo to Osaka at 6 p.m. The aircraft in mention was a Boeing 747 with more than 25,000 flight hours and 18,000 cycles. At 6:04 p.m., the 509 passengers and 15 crewmates were prepared for their trip, and the plane finally took off from the runway at 6:12 p.m. This was 12 minutes behind schedule. The takeoff was smooth, and the first leg of the trip was underway. But within the next few minutes, things took a turn for the worst. Just a few minutes later at 6:24 p.m. while cruising over Sagami Bay, the plane underwent rapid decompression, which caused the tail fin to unseat and sever all hydraulic lines attached to it. This decompression also caused the ceiling within the aircraft to collapse. This was sadly the beginning of the end. The pilots were doing everything they could to secure an emergency landing, but things were looking grim. There was complete loss of control for what I can only imagine felt like an eternity. The aircraft was headed west towards Mount Takamagahara, where it would sadly find its final resting place. This crash would cost 15 crew members and 505 passengers their lives. Some passengers survived the initial impact, but died later while awaiting rescue. The mountainous terrain that the crash took place in made it difficult for rescue efforts to take place. A Japanese Armed Forces helicopter flew over the crash at nightfall, but reported that there were no signs of life at that point. Due to this report, there was a delay in rescue efforts. They had to hold off until morning. There were a total of 4 survivors, all women, and they were all seated on the left side of the plane near the rear of the aircraft. So keep that in mind if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. And if you're a male, good luck, I guess. When you hear someone talking about stampedes, it usually involves country folk going to the Calgary Stampede to party and get belligerently drunk. Or you might also think of the tragic scene from The Lion King where Mufasa's life is tragically taken after being betrayed by his own kind. As a child, that's some pretty good nightmare fuel. But what if I told you that there's stampedes amongst humans as well? Throughout history, there have been dozens of stampedes resulting in countless, and a lot of the time, preventable deaths. One of the more prominent and recent events was the 2022 Halloween crowd crush in Seoul, Korea. On October 29th of that year, 159 people were killed and another 196 were injured. Approximately 100,000 people, mostly young adults, were in Itaewon to celebrate the first Halloween festivities since the social distancing requirements of COVID-19. The street that this whole event occurred on was approximately 150 feet long, and no wider than 10 feet at its narrowest point. Stuffing thousands of people in a confined space like this is nothing short of a recipe for disaster. Panic started to build as a group of young men began pushing people until they started falling over. This is what started the snowball effect. It led to layers of people being stuck underneath one another. Some eyewitness accounts claim the pile of people was 15 feet deep at its worst point. The crush began at 10:08 p.m., and by 10:22 there were over a dozen calls to the authorities. 4 ambulances were dispatched by 10:15 p.m., but the large crowd made it seemingly impossible for the authorities to reach the scene. Eventually, over 800 emergency personnel were dispatched to the horrific event that was unfolding. The crush continued well after midnight, as emergency workers were not able to extract everyone any faster. At this point, dozens of bodies from the failed attempts at resuscitation lay on the street, covered by blankets and clothing. This tragedy, along with many other similar occurrences, could have most definitely been prevented. The investigation that took place after this incident has been heavily criticized, along with the South Korean government, who used the term accident instead of disaster to avoid losing tourist income in Itaewon. The last topic is one of the worst disasters of modern day. This plague to humanity was created on October 27, 2009. And has cost millions of teenage boys hours of their lives. Hours they'll never get back. League of Legends. This game was all the hype when it first came out. It was the new and exciting thing. But it rapidly grew into one of the largest cesspools the gaming community has ever had to face. If you thought COD lobbies were bad, just wait until you mess up a single time in League. You'll get told to kill yourself in 14 different ways before you can even respond. Every day, thousands of people fall victim to the curse of the Rift, spending more and more time in this sink, trying to become the next big esports celebrity. You can still save yourself if you try. To the parents, make your kids stay in school, and don't buy them a computer that was made within the last 15 years. Force them to play Flash games on miniclip. It's the only way to prevent this tragedy. As always, thanks for watching. It's kind of a change of pace from my normal videos, but I hope you found some enjoyment in it regardless. If you'd like to keep up to date with all my future content, feel free to subscribe. And leave a like and all that other good stuff too.